The headlines, the issues impacting you and your family this week in Cincinnati on 9 on your side.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Cincinnati. I'm Tanya O'Rourke. Transportation is such a huge issue in our community. It is widely acknowledged this region can do a lot better in that arena. The Cincinnati Mobility Lab was created to help solve some of the issues, and it recently marked its first anniversary. The project has the city working with Uber, the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber, Sorta, Tank, and others. And one of its first projects is taking a hard look at congestion in heavily used spaces. We're talking, around the Aronoff when a theater lets out, the banks after a baseball game lets out, and in front of Great American Ballpark, and how the curb space is used there plays a big role in congestion and in pedestrian safety. So joining us to talk about this are Pete Metz, he's with the Chamber, Joe Vogel is the director of the Cincinnati Transportation and Engineering Department, and also with me is WCPO Transportation reporter Pat LaFleur. All of you, thank you so much. So give us just the overview. What did this study find?
Pete? So this partnership was all about data in the first place, and so we were able to bring good data from experts at Uber and good data from the city of Cincinnati together to identify not only the locations that we wanted to work on, but also a couple of recommendations on how we might help solve some of the congestion and the pedestrian safety issues and just the general flow of mobility in those locations. And Joe being with the city of Cincinnati is really deep in the weeds on what the next steps are from those. And so we're really excited as a Chamber of Commerce to be bringing all of these key stakeholders together to start really using data to solve some of our problems.
I guess then that begs the question, what are the next steps?
Well, there were three areas that the study focused on initially. The one was on 2nd Street by the Reds Stadium, the other on Freedom Way right in the heart of the banks, and then Walnut Street up by the Aronoff Center. And the one that we're going to implement first is by the Reds Stadium on Pete Rose Way. And we've already started to coordinate with the Reds on that, and we want to have that in place hopefully by opening day.
What does it look like? What are we talking about?
Well, it's really how you use the curb. There's competition for people to drop off. We don't want them dropping off in the 2nd or 3rd lane. We want them to be able to get into the curb, let people out, and get out of the way. And so the study really helped kind of bring into focus what steps we need to take to make that more efficient.
On the curbside drop-off, really kind of explains Uber's involvement in this directly, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the curbside is a finite resource that most people don't think about. We're not building out new curb space in an urban area, and so how do you manage pickups and drop-offs and food delivery and bike and pedestrian access, buses, streetcars in our urban core? How do we manage all of that space effectively? Really impacts how backed up traffic gets leaving an arts event or a sporting event. And so there are ways that we can improve just by allocating curb space differently or making it more flexible.
Can you explain what that actually looks like? So are there going to be that kind of at the airport, the red zone is, are we going to have red zones and yellow zones, and what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, the area adjacent to the Reds Stadium right now, there's a crosshatched area, and we're looking at that thinking, we need to use that better. And so some of that is going to be included in the drop zone. Just more efficient use, really. And the idea, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, but the study was to look at a few specific locations, but then we can extrapolate that throughout downtown. And what we learn here, we can use all over the downtown area.
And that's really the value of the Mobility Lab, is that when we partnered with Uber, they realized that Cincinnati looks a lot like a lot of other cities in this country, and so if they can solve curb access in Cincinnati, they can solve curb access in other cities where they're operating. And so they really view this as an opportunity to learn not only how to work with the public sector in the city of Cincinnati, but also what learnings they can take from here to other cities.
So were you a template then for the rest of the nation?
Absolutely. They refer to us sometimes as a lighthouse city.
Really? Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Pat.
Yeah, no. You mentioned extrapolating, and if we're talking about stadiums, we've got a new stadium coming in onto Central Parkway. Do you imagine things that you learned from this curb study will be applied when we're kind of finalizing the details of the new FC stadium?
They certainly can, and the way, like right now, there was some discussion recently about closing Central Parkway or not closing, and the way we try to develop a plan to handle these things, and then we always make it flexible so that for their first game, we'll be there to observe and see how it works, and then tweak it as necessary. I mean, we we need some flexibility to make sure it can be done successfully. But one discussion we had at the FC was, you know, if Central Parkway is closed, we still would provide access to the garage along the one area. But it's really going to depend. That's the crucial part there is how much pedestrian intermixes there are going to be on Central Parkway. And so we're still studying that. Sure. But like for Reds and Bengal games, we have a plan in place, and it's always subject to improvement, but it's a pretty good plan.
You bring up pedestrians, and I think that that's something as someone, I enjoy walking around town. So what, as pedestrians, and for a lot of folks sitting at home right now wondering, so what does this mean all for me? Like, am I going to have to walk certain directions, avoid certain areas, that things are going to be closed off to me, or opened, channels open just for me? What does that mean?
I think the real value here is that we know in these areas that the city and that Uber chose to study were areas where there was heavy use of pedestrians, heavy use of rideshare, and also in some places heavy use of public transit. And in each of those places, the goal is to make sure that everyone can get where they need to go most efficiently and safely. So it's not safe to be doing pickups and drop-offs in a free flow traffic lane, but when you've got a delivery zone in a location, folks are forced to do that. And so for pedestrians, the goal is to make the curbs smarter so that it's safer for them to get around.
You've already kind of implemented this, a version of this anyway, around the Rheingeist area. Is that correct, where there was an established Uber pickup and drop-off area? How is that related to what you guys are working on now?
I have to apologize. I've only been here for a few months, and I'm not clued into what was done.
Sure, I think the issue was about streetcar blockages happening because of Uber pickups and drop-offs. So Uber worked with the city to establish a rideshare pickup zone, maybe a block farther down the road, so that it would avoid blocking transit. And that's why I bring up the Rheingeist issue, is because of how this applies to transit.
If I may.
Go ahead.
So we do have a study going on right now that is two components. One is a best practices component, and the other is a signal timing optimization component. And in the best practices, we identified areas like that, like one on 12th Street where cars were parked waiting for the light, but they're blocking the streetcar track. So we restriped that lane and push them out of there so that they no longer block the streetcar track. And part of what we're trying to do, and again, to extrapolate citywide, is to look for areas where there are problems, and one by one just keep fixing them. And so that's what we're hoping to accomplish.
You brought up the streetcar, and I think that's something that's everyone at home is like, wait a minute, streetcar, what's going on with streetcar? Is that it sort of is involved, so obviously you guys were discussing streetcar in this. Is that what you were just talking about with the restriping? Are there certain things that you can do to help the streetcar be more efficient?
So I think from a mobility lab perspective, one of the other big deliverables that we've been working on in this first year is an additional study, a transit study that takes SORTA data, tank data from across the river in northern Kentucky, and for the first time ever brings in Uber data. And we're handing that over to a third-party consultant to say, where are the places where we can work together best? Where are the places where folks are trying to get to? And how do we optimize public transit service? So I think from a Cincinnati Mobility Lab perspective, that study is going to be a study that doesn't exist anywhere else in the country, frankly, in the world, in terms of bringing public transit and rideshare data together, and then starting to figure out how those two modes work even more closely in the future.
A groundbreaking study. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for spending some time with us and talking us through what can be a very complicated issue.
Absolutely.